Hello everybody, and welcome back to another perfectly unscientific gaming review, this time in Star Trek Online on the Andrew character. And what we're going to look at today is the Mirror Escort Carrier T6 that was added to the Infinity Lockbox at the tail end of December. So anytime a new ship is added, it spurs lots of questions in folks' minds like myself. What can this ship be used for? What gap does it fill? And where might this be useful? Is it going to break the meta? So on and so forth. And, this ship's not going to break the meta. It's not going to set any new trends or anything to that effect. But it is interesting in its own regard. First and foremost, it's the first escort with 5-4 weapons, temporal seating, and a science focus. And by science focus, I mean it has a Lieutenant Commander science seat, and it also has the accompanying science consoles if you want to run them in such a way. Other ships that are similar to this are the Xindi Reptilian Escort, 5-4 weapons, temporal seating, but not nearly as many science consoles. The NX Escort can be run with a Lieutenant Commander Science, hybrid temporal, though you give some utility up on that. And there's also the Husnock Warship with core temporal seating and 5 forward weapons, but once again, it doesn't have science consoles. So this is what makes the Mirror Escort Carrier unique in that regard. Other ships that are also similar to this are the Klein Temporal Destroyer, the Lafayette Recon Destroyer, though both of these lack an additional 5th forward weapon, and the Recon Destroyer doesn't have temporal seating. So you're giving up a bit with those ships, and this one fills that gap in that it has 5 forward weapons, it has a hangar bay, it has intelligence seating, and it has temporal seating. So when you factor all of these in together, this mix is something we really haven't seen before in this game. It's also only the second escort outside of the Billion EC Plus Amari escort and the Cardassian escort to have intel seating and 5 forward-facing weapons. So that is also another option, the way you could run this as well, if you're just wanting something with a bit of intel seating and 5 forward weapons, but you don't like the Cardassian escort, or you don't want to shell out $1 billion plus EC, this could be another option for you. So we're going to today go over this build that I've been running on this, and it's a hybrid exotic energy build, and the exotic does a fair amount of DPS, so we're just going to jump right into that. So first and foremost, we're running the 2-piece Lucari Advanced Piezo Polaron set, and the reason for this is that the console in this set gives you a Polaron damage boost, and the 2-piece also further boosts your Polaron damage as well. Then we're running the 3-piece Chronometric Calculation set, which is a staple of most science builds that I run. We're running the dual heavy cannons, the heavy turret, and the chronometric capacitor, which in turn gives us this 3-piece ability that boosts our exotic and energy weapon damage for 15 seconds. And you can see if we activate emergency power to weapons and override subsystems, you can see how these boosts just spike up, and that's why we're doing that. Our next weapon is a wide arc dual heavy Polaron cannon. It hasn't been re-rolled yet to damage times 3 arc. And the final weapon is just a advanced fleet Polaron cannon. This could maybe be replaced at some point with the tier 6 temporal reputation Polaron cannon to have that chance of further reducing bridge officer cooldowns, but that's an option. Our deflector is the staple Elite Fleet Intervention Protomatter that gives us a scaling crit chance and crit severity as our health goes up. Our Impulse engine is the competitive engine that synergizes to our tactical abilities so that whenever we activate one of our 3 weapon firing modes, we get a mini evasive maneuvers. Now, our Warp Core and shields here are designed to synergize around our exotic abilities, and this is one that I run on my science builds, which you saw earlier in 2018. 25% damage over time for, or 25% all damage boost for damage over time effects and hazard effects. And what that effectively means is that our subspace vortex and gravity well are going to be boosted by that. And we're also running the 3-piece morphogenic set from the mission called Home. You can see it in the energy torpedo, the morphogenic energy weapon, and the morphogenic matrix controller. And its 3-piece gives us a cooldown reduction on tactical bridge officer firing abilities, and stacking crit chance when we activate Fire at Will and our scatter volley, and just whenever we activate the kinetic powers, a bit of a damage boost overall for all weapon damage. Console-wise, we got the ship console here that actually comes from the ship, minor boost to EPG and aux power, but also gives us an electrical damage to a primary target. Then it splits off to secondary and tertiary targets for dealing damage up to 7 targets in total. And this is actually factoring in around 4 to 6k DPS in the parses that I've done of this. Then in our science consoles, we could be running more science abilities to boost our EPG up, but we're just running the staple bioneural infusion circuits for our crit severity, the DPRM, Dynamic Power Redistributor module, for the bonus damage value when we're above 80% HP when we activate it and to heal us. And the Protomatter Field Projector, as this thing does draw a lot of threat, it needs healing, and you'll see why we want to keep above 80% health in just a moment. Then just a exotic particle focuser console to boost our EPG values and control. Then down here in the tactical consoles, 3 Polaron vulnerability locators, the chronometric capacitor as part of the 3-piece that I mentioned, and the morphogenic matrix controller. Then the hangar bay is these carrier pets that came with the ship, the Elite Mirror Federation shuttlecraft. Now, we are actually using the trait that came with the ship, and this trait's interesting because whenever you activate Fire at Will or Scatter Volley, you get what effectively amounts to an attack pattern beta 1 hitting all of your targets, and the pets also are granted Fire at Will 1. Now, the skill tree for this is a generic tactical ultimate skill tree, not much to write home about there. Specialization-wise, we have Temporal and Strategist maxed out to full. And what this gives us for our stats on this ship, science-wise, is we end up coming close to 250 EPG. We're currently at 239. This could go up a tiny bit, but it's good for this build. Now, traits, I'll just go through these. Most of these are fairly self-explanatory. Context is for kings is good. If you're not taking damage, you get bonus all damage. Fleet coordinator is pretty much a must. Pseudo submission was chosen specifically for the place aid here to try and reduce threat on this build. And you would not want to do this build without particle manipulator, because this greatly increases the critical hit chance for all your exotic abilities and boosts their critical hit severity as well. Repair crews, another oriented build or another oriented trait for survival, and self-modulating fire just to give us that extra shield pen. Now, Starship Trait wise, we have Withering Barrage to extend the cannon scatter volley, Emergency Weapon Cycle reduces power that energy weapons use, and Firing Cycle Haste. Honored Dead wants another attempt to keep us alive, boost damage resistance, and hull regen. Then, as we mentioned, we are actually running the trait from this ship itself, Superior Area Denial. You could drop this out for another trait of your choice, but my bridge officer layout factored into this decision. And then Peak Efficiency from the Vonf, which is my main cooldown reduction mechanic, and that's why we want to stay above 80% HP. Reputation, Energy Refrequencer to heal us whenever we deal damage. Aux Power Offense from Nukara, critical hit chance, critical severity, and a slight bonus energy and projectile weapon damage boost for targets that are controlled, which is going to be most of them. And I should mention that we are also running the Graviton Implosion Charges experimental weapon that came with the ship, because it factors into what our build is doing. You would get better mileage with the Voice of the Prophets or the Protomatter Sheller, but the fact we're using Gravity Well 1 means that we need extra emphasis to pull the targets closer together, because Gravity Well 1 is not going to get that done. So our experimental weapon helps with that. as does the chronometric inversion field that we put down in the immediate area of effect as well. Now for the rest of the bridge officer abilities, emergency power to weapons, emergency power to engines are explanatory to proc the con officer and to give us a boost to our energy weapon damage and proc that emergency weapon cycle trait. Then here we're running fire at will to proc superior area denial, activate the fire at will 1 on our hangar pets, and get us that minor beta 1 style debuff. Torpedo spread 3 and scatter volley 3. Now in this intelligence seat, Intel Team 1, you could replace this and put the engineering team here and run something else up here like Chemosite or a beam overload, but I wanted to put this in here to shed threat because that was a major problem for this build in its development, the survival of it. Override subsystem safety 2 for the power spike, and then just hazard emitters, subspace vortex 2, and gravity well 1. And these all synergize nicely together, as you'll see in the build, or rather the ISA parse in just a moment. Now, bridge officer or duty officer wise, the emergency con officer, as I alluded to, 3 energy weapon officers for stacking crit severity buff. The green ones are okay, the blue and purple ones are a bit expensive. And this biochemist, Xindi biochemist, which gives us a 10% chance for minus 50% threat reduction for 10 seconds when activating any non-weapon bridge officer ability. And as you can see here, that's the general theme. This duty officer, Intel team, pseudo-submission, all trying to keep this ship alive because it is an escort, and when you're running ISA pugs or you're running pugs anywhere, you're going to be dealing a lot of damage with this build, and that means threat, and you don't do damage if you don't stay alive. Now let's have a look at the parse. So this parse has a substantial amount of pet damage, and we'll tab over into that right now. You can see that our shuttlecrafts did about 11.1k DPS. I've seen these go up as high as 12 or 15k, and that's only with one hanger of them. So they're actually a pretty good pet choice. Then some minor damage from a fleet support, the anti-time entanglement singularity, and chronometric inversion field a bit. Now, focusing in on the rest of the build, primarily the focus here, of course, is our energy weapon damage, which is good. But then you see right behind, we have the subspace vortex at 5.6k and our Graviton Implosion projector at 5.6k as well, which did actually more than our turret did. Now, Cascading Subatomic Disruptions only got 1k done in this parse that you're seeing, mainly because it wasn't activated in a large enough group. This in itself, this ability has gone up to about 4 to 6k, so you could keep this, you could drop it. It all depends on what you're trying to do for theme, but I decided to keep it because it's actually a decent console in the fact that when you fire it off correctly, it can net you around 4 to 6k DPS. All right, hopefully you guys found that useful, and it's certainly an interesting ship. And as I said in the intro, it's pretty unique in its own regard in that nothing has done this combination before in Star Trek Online after all these years. And that's what the purpose of this video was about, was to showcase just how unique it is. But also, if you wanted to, you could just run it as standard escort DPS, cannon DPS boat. So with that being said, if you found this at all useful to you, give it a like, and we'll see you next time for more sciencey related things.